Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fitaurus Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fitaurus. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this Saturday we have Rapid Reload, or as it was known in Japan, Gunner's Heaven, a run and gun shoot 'em up originally released for the PlayStation. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. So as we start the game, we're taken to the character select screen and introduced to our two protagonists, Axel Sonics and Ruka Hetfield, both treasure hunters seeking the legendary treasure known as the Valkyrie, though they'll have to defeat the terrorist organization Pumpkinheads to obtain it. They're both fundamentally the same as far as movement is concerned, but they do have some differences as far as weapon loadout is concerned. So, depending on who you pick, that'll change your gameplay a little bit. Today, we'll be playing as Axel Sonics, as, well, I personally prefer his loadout better. After you select your character, we're dropped right into the action. So one thing that's notable about Rapid Reload, or Gunner's Heaven, is that it was never released in North America, despite the fact it has a perfectly acceptable English localization. The game came out in Japan in 1995 in April, and was released in September of 95 in Europe, but never saw a release in the North American territories. So it's notable for that reason. The game itself is a relatively straightforward run-and-gun shoot-'em-up, and that might be part of the reason, is the title itself was kind of a generic game in and of itself. So we have the ability to, of course, move around, and we can fire our weapon in 8 directions. It's pretty standard fare for this kind of run-and-gun shoot-'em-up. But one thing that is unique is we actually have all 4 weapons that are present available to us right from the get-go. We have our normal, there's a homing, which does a great job taking care of the small fry in the game. We have a ground weapon, which for Axel, when it hits the ground here, turns into a really powerful sonic wave. And there's also a flame weapon. In this case, a firebomb for Axel, and if we're playing as Ruka, it's more of a flamethrower. The game also has a unique power point system, where many enemies that we defeat will drop little P icons of different colors, red for the base one, yellow, green, blue, with different power values. And those will allow us to power up our weapon. So when we collect those, the power meter in the middle top of the screen will go up. And as long as we have power, we'll be using the upgraded versions of our weapon. Run out of power and we'll be back to the base, which is not something we want to have happen. So having all 4 weapons from the get-go, it's important to choose the right weapon for the particular situation, as you'll have better luck moving through the stages if you have the right weapon for the right job. In most cases that means using the homing, but every once in a while some of the other weapons will be a better fit for what we're doing. As typical of homing weapon, the homing weapons don't do a lot of damage against enemies that have high HP. Movement wise, we have the ability to dash around the stage. Oh, there are also other power-ups, life power-ups. In this case, like one that's really awesome, the boost power-up, which gives us a super powered up version of all of our weapons. Life, the boost power-up, and we can also get bombs. Though the bombs aren't overly useful, so I don't use them that often. Anyway, as far as our movement is concerned, we have a couple different ways we can go and move around. In addition to just our standard walking, we do have the ability to dash around by holding down and pressing the jump button. There's also a wire, which I'll make use of in the next section of the screen after I defeat this area boss, that acts as a grapple hook. So the game itself has 6 stages, and each stage is broken up into sections, guarded by either an area boss or the actual stage guardian itself. So the bosses themselves are relatively easy to take down once you've learned their patterns, as they definitely stick to those patterns. making it one that's worth replaying so you can get better at taking them out a little bit quicker. So here we are at the final section of Stage 1. Since this is a vertical shaft, it's really helpful to go through it using the homing weapon, as it makes short work of all these small fry enemies around us. So the third method of moving I mentioned was a wire. We have like a grapple hook that we can fire directly above us or left and right, providing for some quick vertical movement, and we're also temporarily invulnerable when we use the wire. So here we're at a shaft at the end of the game that kind of highlights a problem with it. If we hadn't picked up that last blue gem power-up, our power would have expired before we came to the boss, and we would be fighting the boss with base level weapons, which is undesirable. In boss fights, your power counter does pause, so you don't run out of the upgraded weapon, but if you happen to be fighting a boss, or even the stages themselves with the base weapons, it can be frustrating and difficult. So here we come against the first stage Guardian. So this fight is broken up into two phases, where we have to take out these two walking legs, made quite easy if we have the upgraded homing. We just need to deal enough damage to disable these two walkers. We could probably be making shorter work of them with other weapons. And then once the legs are defeated, the core, finally decides to engage us. Here, the fire weapon works best, as it deals a fair bit of damage to him really rapidly. Once he drops under 2,000, the legs will be completely defeated, and we can take up positions and just fire away at him while he tries to fire a beam very ineffectually at us. And the Guardian crushed. You shouldn't judge people by their appearances. Damn it, we'll find the Valkyrie first at any cost. And that is basically Rapid Reload, or Gunner's Heaven, whichever title you choose to use for the game itself. So it never did receive a North American release, and as far as other releases, it wouldn't go and see any kind of re-release until years later, where it was released digitally on the PlayStation 3, but only in the Japanese region. It didn't receive a PlayStation 3 PSN release in Europe, surprisingly. It is also available in Asia on the PlayStation 3 as well, just a note. So, minus flavors, the game itself is relatively unbalanced. So, it's very dependent on the power point system. But there are points, especially later in the game, where you have large sections where there's no power points to be gained at all, and then having to face tough enemies afterwards is like frustrating and difficult at best. Also, like, the game itself, like other titles it's similar to, would be great with a co-op mode, like Gunstar Heroes. You can totally play that one co-op. But, strangely enough, that is completely missing from Rapid Reload. Maybe part of that might have been the inexperience of the developers. It was developed by Mediavision, the developers best known for Wild Arms. But it was only their second title, so maybe they weren't too familiar with coding still. It's strange, though, because if the Genesis could do co-op with this kind of gameplay and graphics relatively easily, then the PlayStation surely should have been able to. Plus flavors, I do like the sprite work quite a bit, as well as the explosions. Always a point that I really enjoy. Also, the PowerPoint system that the game has is interesting, even though it is unbalanced and is like simultaneously the game's best and most unique feature as well as most frustrating feature. So there we have it. Rapid reload served up for your enjoyment. Overall, I feel that this is shoot 'em up that is like not necessarily one you need to seek out. There really are better run and gun shoot 'em ups out there. So if you're going to like trying to get a good run and gun fix, you could definitely do well with so many other titles than this one. Though it does have just that uniqueness that it was one that was never released outside of Japan and Europe. Well, there we go. That'll about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for coming out and joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.